Konnichiwa, Monsieur Rigatoni. To continue, a man stood at the door, holding his hat in his hands, his eyes both subdued and anxietized. That peculiar obsequious feeling in certain stoic men when at last they are called upon to exhibit the soft side of human behavior. This doughy wad of feeling sending his eyes reeling, not in the reason for his visit, but for the fact that he sensed in this sudden sensitivity of his the very door to his demise. He didn't speak English. I stood in the doorway to the hall and listened, watched. My father asked him who he was and what he was doing knocking on our door. I noticed irritation in his voice. My eyes went to the man's. He was squeezing his hat in his hands. I thought of roaring out the astrological sequence, the order of the signs, a loud recitation of the principles of the celestial equinox. The man, unable to speak English, began a pantomime. From the darkness of the hall, I watched him. It was hilarious. I tried not to laugh. It was queer. I found what the man was doing unusual, bizarre, almost intentionally comical, like the cartoons I'd watched on Saturday mornings. I followed the logic of his gesticulations closely. A day of almost frightening beauty with the ships going out beyond the quay, the spit of land under whose scalpel light was cutting intricate patterns, occult symbols on the canvas of a circumambulance in high recalcitrance against everything conceived as real. The lunch, pulled from a cooler by one of her friends had brought, my mother eating a sandwich and drinking a soft drink out of a can. I watched the pantomime of this man trying to explain something to my father, who, it seemed, was unlike me, entirely capable of following what the man was trying to communicate, whereas I, like I said, by contrast, followed every detail and constructed a picture of astonishing clarity in my mind as if I were watching a film of pristine cinematographic quality. I watched as he reconstructed from my father the sequence in which my mother tells her friends that she is to take the water. She is to go for a swim in the warm water of the sea. Her trim feet, lightly alighting on a sand pleasurably concussed by the slight slaps of her bare feet against itself, the sea lying calmly today, the shallows extending for perhaps half a mile, and my mother's slim waist lightly washed by the waves, peripatetic ablution in chase of a beach sprinting in motionless race further and further away, until in climactic capsize the wave drives its face against the hard carpet of sand, bashing it into so many liquid fragments, scattered in moil and rush in this great gush of suicidal water, the form of which was amorphous as a jellyfish. Then the pantomime routine took a turn my father didn't expect. For this man was going through the motions, imitating a woman fighting to stay above the surface of the water, taking water in her mouth, and with fatiguing arms and legs, the face panic-stricken, amazed, buffoonish, the man's hands waving around all over the place and making little yelping sounds, crying out in his language for help, it would seem, a word shouted over and over again, while my father began to walk backward, back into the darkness of the house, a swishing retreat of his soft slippers over the wood floor. The house plunged in darkness at this hour in the afternoon, and the last thing my father saw of this man before he turned the corner into his bedroom and walked backwards to his bed, enveloped in a darkness that would swaddle him from here on out. The last thing my father seeing, I say, was the pantomime routine the man went through to crown the horror, the shock of water hitting the lungs, a great bottle of salt water poured down the throat of my mother, filling the lungs like wine bladders, the look of disbelief on a face outraged by the violence of death, and then the empty, eternal stare fixed into the labyrinths of blue and brown nothingness, churned in whirling patterns of cyclonic fingers stirring the deeps clean down to the bottom. This woman of slim-waisted attractiveness and spectral drift through the interminable element, great dumb fishes with minds and mouths like cows, but with incisors that cut, slice, this woman, according to the man's pantomime routine, who yielded the soft flesh of her perfumed body to the vicissitudes of a sea that would turn every square inch of her greener than a blade of everglade grass. The salt, the sea, the fish, my mother. My father went backwards to bed, the door seemingly closing of itself behind him. The man at the door put his hat back on and went out the gate, out into the street, and vanished. 2 days later, some women arrived, friends of the family, with groceries, some food they'd prepared. When they left, nobody put the food in the refrigerator. It sat there for weeks, rotting, going through a long process of putrescence, a tedious ordeal in which nature exacted a strict determinism, unfailing, serious, imperious. There were eggs in those bags. I thought of a progeny born out of dissolution, the kind of bird that would spring malformed from such an egg as that, too grody to perceive, too noxious to smell, too disgusting to gag at. The sagging yolk 10 days old in the gloom of the hot kitchen in this hot region of the world, the very substance of dilapidation, an elixir like an abomination of the brain. My mother's saltwater body as wet as a sponge, soaked, bloated, brown and blue like the sea that orbed her in a vast architecture heaving in mountainous uprise of mammoth size and proportion, the slow extinction of motion and the erosion of action capping these breakers, tossing her about like a zygote spinning in a washing machine womb. My mother buried in the tomb of the sea that embraced her like the grave would on dry land, but with a wetter hand indeed, for my mother's body would dissolve like an antacid in the great cup of the salty sea, fishes gleefully raising Cain in the sanctuary of her proud estate, that cathedral regal beyond compare, now bare to the element, the smell of it. I'll stop there.